And these are shadim. We translate demons, but a shade is not precisely a demon because shadim are good shadim. The shade is a being that is partially physical and it can take a physical form, but is a spiritual being. Now, where am I going with this? So the Zohar says, how could it be that such a holy person as Esther, a prophetess who wrote a book of the Tanakh, should never be stuck being intimate with not just a goy, but a really horrible, evil goy like Achashverosh? So the Zohar says in Parshas Kiteitzei, Parshas Kiteitzei 276, page 276, side 1. So the answer is, even though they were in the same house, but like Yosef, it says that Yosef left his garment by Potiphar when he ran away. So the idea is the same thing is that Esther left her garment. What does that mean? That the divine presence hid Esther from Achashverosh and instead placed a female demon. In other words, a shed took physical form and took the form of Esther. So Achashverosh really was intimate with this demon, with this creature that is neither physical nor spiritual, but takes a physical form, sort of a God-manufactured robot. And Esther was, so Achashverosh thought he was Esther. Really, he was with this shed, with this creature, and meanwhile, that looked just like Esther. And meanwhile, since Achashverosh was occupied with the fake Esther, says the Zohar, the real Esther went and was intimate with Mordechai. So according to that, it would follow that if Darius, who allowed the temple to be rebuilt, according to both the Gemara and the Zohar, that if Darius, who allowed the temple to be rebuilt, was the son of Esther, he was really Mordechai's son, and therefore completely Jewish. Okay, so that is the Zohar. And the Gemara simply says that she managed to sneak away. Okay. Yeah, Bob.
It's a lot to
Robert Kirshner, he's coming.
a lot to digest, I'll tell you.
Well, nowadays you could make a robot, but this is something the Talmud takes seriously, and certainly the Zohar takes seriously, because to the Zohar, which is the mystical work, it's inconceivable that Esther should be defiled by someone like Achashverosh. Okay. So now we go back to we leave this very interesting question, and go back to the story of Bigson and Saras and so on. Okay. So if you remember, Haman was told Achashverosh that since the Jews don't really keep the mitzvahs that well, we can destroy them. And he's ready to pay the money, but the Jews already gave their half shekels. We learned about that. And now we get to we move from the mystical to the philosophical, to the political. So what happened? So if you remember, what does it say in the Megillah? That the king told Haman, it's okay, you don't have to give me 10,000, pounds or 100,000 pounds of silver. Keep your money and kill the Jews. I don't like the Jews either. Keep your money and kill the Jews. At the very end of 13b, beginning of 14a, Omer Rabbi Abba said, Moshel Achashverosh, what is the parable of Achashverosh? So the story of Achashverosh and Haman, Lama Davar Domer. What is this similar to? The Shnei B'nei Adam, there were two people. One person had a big hill in his field that prevented him from properly plowing it. Someone had a big hole in his field. So Baal Chritz Omar meeting tells Aggadot. So the owner of the big hole in the field goes to the owner of the hill and says, how much do you want for your pile of dirt? Amalei, please take it for free. This hill is messing up my field. And if only you would take the whole thing. So when Haman comes and says, I have this big hole in my life, I need to get rid of the Jews, and I'll give you lots of money, Achashverosh says, please, I hate the Jews too. There's this big hill in the way. So now we have to understand, what does this mean? Why does Haman have a hill? Why does Haman have a hole and Achashverosh have a hill? So the answer is that there are two kinds of hatred of the Jewish people. One is the hole. In other words, the Jewish people are a whole, which means to say they reveal to you your lowliness. In other words, Haman was greedy, a murderer. Haman was a bad person. And Haman was an actively evil person. And his goal, in other words, he wasn't just someone who was selfish, who was self-indulgent, who wanted power and was willing to trample and kill people to get there. Haman genuinely embraced evil. Not lahavdil, but like the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, like the worst of the communists in the Stalinist era. He was someone who embraced evil. He enjoyed human suffering. He enjoyed degrading people. He enjoyed the idea of massacring millions of people. He was someone who loved evil. So the Jewish people were a big hole because they showed to him how lowly evil is. He said, I'll kill whoever I want to. I want to destroy this people. And the Jewish people says, you know what? Hashem created the human being in Hashem's image. You are so low and despicable because precisely you embrace evil and you love evil. So they showed Haman his lowness. Achashverosh was a different kind of person. Achashverosh did evil because it was convenient for him. Achashverosh was someone who pursued evil. He figured he pursued evil because it benefited him. He killed Vashti because it benefited him. He made this horrible contest where thousands of women were taken away from their homes, never to return, because once they were in Achashverosh's grasp, once they were stuck in the harem forever. He was a selfish, greedy, evil person. But his evil was his desire to be great. He wanted to be the biggest and the strongest and the greatest. And therefore, he was willing to do evil. He was willing to walk over people to get there. Haman loved evil for its own sake. Achashverosh embraced evil as a means of reaching the greatest heights. The problem is that when Achashverosh stood at the greatest heights, why was he so strong the Beit HaMikdash should not be rebuilt? Because Achashverosh said, I'm going to be the greatest king of all. And then he looks and he sees that the true greatness is held by the Jewish people, who retain their holiness and goodness even in exile, retain their faith even in the worst of times. And when the temple is rebuilt, represent the greatest height where divine presence rests upon the Jewish people in Jerusalem and nowhere else in the world. Whatever greatness Achashverosh gets, it's nothing compared to the greatness and the height of the Jewish people, who literally are embraced by God and are the sole means by which God is connected to the world. They are the sole means of focus. If not for the Jewish people, there would be no world. And he knows that. So Achashverosh wants to reach the great heights. And after he climbs over all the bodies he climbed to, he looks up and there's this huge mountain, this huge hill. The Jewish people are standing on the top, figuratively thumbing their nose at him. All your greatness, all your 127 countries is nothing compared to Shabbat, to our prayer, and certainly to our Beit HaMikdash, to our temple. So Achashverosh, who seeks greatness, sees the Jewish people standing upon a hill he can't reach. So Haman, who embraces evil and loves evil and revels in human suffering, Judaism shows that the Jews show him how despicable and lowly he is, how a fundamental contradiction to the entire purpose of creation he is, how he's the lowest of the low, because as the Gemara says, if a person is evil, we tell him even the fly was created before you. There's nothing lower or more horrible than an evil human being. And Achashverosh, who seeks greatness and is willing to do anything to get it, and he has this vast empire, he looks up at the Jewish people and they are far greater and more eternal than his empire. We're still here. He's in the history books and so on. So their anti-Semitism comes from two separate places. There's two kinds of anti-Semitism. The desire to be the greatest, when then you see the Jews' greatness is far higher. And then the desire to be evil, and you embrace evil, like the Nazis in Machshemon embrace social Darwinism, and the Jewish people stand there and show you how lowly and despicable you are, how your embrace of evil makes you worse than the worst animal. So those are the two kinds of hatred of the Jewish people. So Haman is upset that the Jewish people show him how low he is. And Achashverosh is upset the Jewish people show him how high they are and how he can never reach the true heights of eternal, everlasting greatness. One thinks of Shelley's poem, was it Dominus, however you pronounce it. I am king of kings, and it's just an empty ruin lying there. It's a great British poet. Look it up. And you could think of Achash. When I read that poem first as a child, I thought of Achashverosh. Anyways, so Haman says, I have this the Jewish people's existence tells me how low and horrible and evil and worthless I am. So Achashverosh says, please take my hill. The Jewish people show me how I'll never reach any true eternal greatness. So they both hated and wanted to destroy the Jews for different reasons. And as a matter of fact, I think we see this in recent history. If you take a look, if you take a look at the anti-Semitism of the church, of all the churches over the last almost 2,000 years, what do they say? They say that that God gave the Torah, but now God replaced it, and everyone can be part of the covenant, and you just have to believe in a certain thing, and then you don't have to do all the mitzvot. You can have all the taste and none of the calories. The problem is, and therefore Judaism is canceled, to use the modern term. The problem is that Judaism isn't canceled. The Jews continued to learn and to pray and to study Torah and to be morally and spiritually far greater than the non-Jewish world they lived in at every moment in their history. So the church looked and said, we thought the Jews are gone. Here they stand way above us, and they make our whole religion alive, because the whole premise is that the Torah is canceled, and the Torah is not canceled. They're still keeping it. Let's kill them and pull them down, hence the Crusades and all those things, and the Inquisition, etc. The other kind is, and Hitler Yamav Shemo writes about this in Mein Kampf, that the Jews, because even though we just criticize the church, the fact is certain Jewish ideas made their way into Christianity. And Hitler writes, this idea of mercy and kindness is an evil thing the Jews have brought into the world, because we want to be evil. We want to say whoever is more powerful has the right to crush, destroy, and murder everyone else and take everything that belongs to them. Lebensraum, right? Living space. So there's 20 million Slavs there, we'll kill them all. Now, 100 million actually. That was his plan after he finished with the Jews. So what did the Jewish people show? That there's such a thing as compassion and mercy. That your agenda is evil and lowly, and there's nothing more lower and despicable. Because Hitler Yamach Shemo only got 12 years of his 1,000-year Reich, but for more than 1,000 years, the Nazis will remain the byword for evil. So Hitler Yamach, the church saw the Jews as lofty and sought to destroy them. The modern fascist anti-Semitism, and you see this, the left-wing anti-Semitism today, sees the Jewish people as just and righteous and good and eternal, with an eternal link to the land of Israel, and they seek to pull that down. How dare you say that there's a divine connection in the very soil? We don't see God in the soil, but the Jew sees God in the soil. And that's why all those who stand against Israel are just plain old anti-Semites, but of the Achashverosh variety. They want to pull us down, as the French ambassador to the United Nations said in a recording that was captured during the first Gaza war. Who do these blankety blank Jews think they are? They think they're right and the whole world is wrong. And the answer is yes, we're right. We stand higher. The whole world is wrong and needs to learn from us. So in this little piece of Gemara in Megillah 14a lies the entire scope of the different types of anti-Semitism. And as my friend Norbert Liss, of blessed memory, a Holocaust survivor from Lodz, said that the one thing, I mentioned this many times, that the one thing he knew was that Judaism must be true and must be good because the greatest evil the world had ever seen sought to eradicate it. And these ideas lie in these two lines of Gemara, two very important lines of Gemara. And I think this is a time to pause for question and comments.
Rabbi?
Yes.
What do you think of the evangelical Christian support of Israel, considering that it's not for totally unselfish reasons?
Right. So let me tell you, I'm actually friendly with several evangelicals. And we've agreed to defer the question of who goes to Gan Eden to later. But here's the deal. It's very complicated because on one hand, they definitely believe that the coming of Mashiach, rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash, is a prelude to their second coming.
The rapture.
Right. Rapture, there's a lot of it. There's as many different versions of evangelical and charismatic Christianity there are. That's how many different approaches they have, because they're, that's the nature of the church. It's extremely fragmented. But at the same time, on a visceral level, without getting into the theology, and this I know from many people I'm friendly with. Many of them I met online over the years, but some of them are people I actually grew up with in Maine who are strong evangelicals who I when Facebook came out, we reconnected. They love this particular family loved shmura matzah. They were my age, bunch of kids. And every Pesach, they came over to the house because they wanted shmura matzah. For some reason, it was a half French, half Irish family, Catholics, but later they became evangelicals, and they absolutely loved shmura matzah. Anyway, but going back, the point is, I know a lot of people, so they have a respect, even though they say that the Torah Tanakh is superseded. It's complicated because they have a fundamental respect for the Tanakh. Maimonides says this, even though he holds that Christianity is close to Avodah Zarah. Maimonides says that they respect the Tanakh as Hashem's words. So because they do, even though they feel to some extent it's superseded, when the Tanakh talks about the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, when the Tanakh talks about the land of Israel as the eternal property of the children of Israel, they respond to this viscerally. So even though at an intellectual level they say, well, in the end, everyone has to be a Christian and there's the rapture or whatever, but on a personal level, they respond in a very positive way to the texts of the Tanakh that speak of the land of Israel as holy and the Jewish people as holy and chosen and so on. It's a cognitive dissonance, but a lot of people live with a lot of cognitive dissonances, and there's a lot of cognitive dissonances in Christianity and, for that matter, Islam and so on. So they live with it. So it's complicated because I believe their support is genuine and real, even if there is an agenda. And as I told a friend of mine who's actually a minister, I said, look, we agree on a lot of things. We agree on supporting land of Israel. We agree on the need for morality and a belief in God at a generic level, and for decency to remain as fundamental in American society. We share many values. So the question of who is Mashiach, and we'll leave for later. At the end of days, we'll see who's right. But until then, we can work. I think that's the issue. And combined with that is a visceral sense, even if it doesn't match precisely the intellectual contours of their religion, is that the Tanakh is Hashem's word, and the Jewish people are Hashem's chosen people. my friend Chaim Starr from West Hartford. He used to travel a lot. He used to be involved in. He did educational work for one of the big insurance companies. Very complex things, and he taught not just agents, but officers of the company all over the country. So he traveled a lot. And one night, in the winter, the connections canceled, so he's overnight in the terminal and bothered to go to a hotel. And there's a guy cleaning there, a Hispanic gentleman. And he comes over to him and says, he sees his yarmulke and his beard. He says, "Are you Jewish?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "You should know." And he belonged to some small charismatic evangelical Puerto Rican church, I believe in Chicago. And he says, "Our minister says that when we give our tithes, they like Jews, they give 10% of their earnings to charity." She says he takes half of our tithes and sends it to support poor Jews in Israel, because we know that God chose the Jewish people in the land of Israel. We have to support them. So whatever else the agenda is, I think this is very deep and very sincere. And I don't think it's not coming from the Christian anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism is as anti-Semitism does. If someone supports the Arab terrorists and someone makes claims that the Jews have no right to Israel because their new religion canceled it, and someone, speaks up against the Jewish people and falsely accuses of his atrocities and so on, that's anti-Semitism. And that comes from their beliefs. But when there's a Christian who correctly denigrates the terrorists and supports the Jewish people, both financially and personally, and stands up for the Jews and demands that, you have all these representatives from states and districts, representatives and senators who are super supportive of Israel, and none of them have any Jews in their district even, because their own people demand this. So when they support us and want to protect us and want to help us, so whatever the motivation, God looks at the deed. The deed is good, and however they work out their theology, I don't care, because it's coming from a deep and true place, because deep down they know the Tanakh is true. That is what I believe, Mark.
There are examples of that in Europe, of Christian communities like Huguenots in France who saved Jewish children.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that goes without saying.
To do. They thought it was the right thing to do.
Right, but I'm just saying that we have a propensity that we look at those denominations of Christianity that very much like they've reformed their Christianity. They've gone very much away from most of the ideas of religion and so on. And we say, oh, these are better, but they're anti-Israel and they're frankly anti-Semitic. Whereas you have very traditional groups who might have this whole, rapture idea and so on, but that's in the future. Right now, they feel a fundamental connection to the land of Israel, to the Jewish people. So their feelings are more correct than their intellect. Their visceral relation to the Bible is stronger than their theology, which is questionable. So I would embrace that support and wish them well, because mostly these are decent people who are trying to do the right thing. Whatever the details of their religion. In the end, God looks at deeds, and these are people who are closer to the 7 Noahide laws.
Rabbi?
That's what I would say.
Thank you. Do you have time for another question? Or maybe somebody else wants to ask? Joe or someone else?
No, Joe's quiet today,
Okay, so go ahead, Mark.
taking a break.
So what do you think of the idea that Jews need to be model citizens, and then you have people like Harvey Weinstein or Epstein, or some of the behavior in the
So they're very simple. I believe that Jews need to be model citizens, and particularly they need to model Judaism as an inspiration to those around them. And that when we're not good, connected Jews, we don't live our Judaism well, We let down the people around us because we need to be a light to everyone. That's our job. But that being said, everyone you mentioned were transgressing numerous mitzvot in the Torah about theft, about licentiousness, and so on. In other words, these are people who are notable because they have abandoned and rejected Judaism. Are they still Jews? Halachically, yes. Your deeds don't mean a Jew is always a Jew. But, we have brother, a person can have a brother or sister who's a murderer. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean it's not your brother or sister. But the larger point is, of course, that these people are modeling everything Judaism stands against. They are rejecting their Judaism. They're behaving against it. So it's not a question. You say the Jews should be an example. So what do you want to do with a Jew who chooses to reject Judaism? No, what should I tell you? We have free will.
Okay, but what about Orthodox Jews who, let's say, refuse to give a get, Aggadot?
Same thing. That's a transgression. And in the old days, they would pull them aside and say, listen, there's two ways a woman becomes free. Either she becomes divorced or she becomes a widow. But nowadays we don't have the power to do that. The answer is they're doing a terrible sin. And again, they're betraying Judaism. The same thing to people who are not getting vaccinated in the Orthodox community, are not properly wearing masks. They are transgressing the Torah no less and worse than eating pork. That's all. People who claim to be religious Jews can transgress the Torah, and people who never claim to be religious Jews, like Weinstein and Epstein and what's his name? Who's the guy? Madoff, who stole all the money. These people are also rejecting Judaism.
So
In other words, we should be a good example. And when a Jew transgresses the Torah, he or she does two terrible things. One, you go against Hashem. Secondly, you do the opposite of setting an example, which is why Hashem chose you in the first place. So I have nothing to say. What do you do with a Jew who doesn't behave as a Jew should? What do you do with a person who doesn't behave as a human being should? That's why God gave us free will, and that's what happens. And that's the point Haman made earlier in yesterday's Gemara, that the Jews are not keeping Hashem's commands, therefore they're vulnerable, because they do have to be a good example. But that's up to us. That's our free will. So your question is basically, why does a person have free will? And the answer is because that's the only way our life has any meaning. When the good that we do is good, we choose on our own. Okay. Have a great day, everyone. And we have a short 15-minute partial lunch and learn today. All the best.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Hope that was a wonderful talk.
Well, thank you, Israel. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. It's good to see.
It's good to see you too, Rabbi. And this kind of helped me. The thing you sent me.
The Kaddish?
Yes, it helped.
Very
me
good. Well, enjoy. Take care.
I decided not to do all the long parts of the prayers. I said just do quasi Kaddish.
Very good. Take care of that. Whatever works for you.